Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another APM webinar this afternoon. Today we have Building Resilience and Managing in Dynamic, Unpredictable, Challenging Times. But right now I'd like to introduce our speaker, our main event today. I'd like to join and welcome Trudi West from Holt Ashridge Executive Education. Trudy's a member of their leadership faculty and for many years now has been working with senior and experienced leaders across the world. So without any further ado, I want to hand over to Trudy. Thank you, Trudy.
Lovely, thank you, Sarah. And thank you for inviting me to take this opportunity to speak to you today about something that's quite close to my heart and has become quite prevalent in the last several weeks now of lockdown and being able to bring stuff into people's lives and to kind of more importantly into people's homes, because the overlap of life, of work and family and kids and everything is so much more stacked up on top of each other now. So resilience is kind of even more important. So this is me. I'd like to say I was much darker before lockdown, but I've not gone much grayer over lockdown. And I'm a leadership faculty, as Sarah said, and that means I work with people from public sector, private sector and third sector, and typically in groups, large groups, anywhere between 10 and 100, 200 people, but usually helping people think, feel and act as leaders given the context that they're in. I'm also an action researcher, so most of my research is based on primary experience and then gets rolled out to how does that work out with others. So I'm often having to kind of investigate myself in terms of where I go under pressure. It's something I'm particularly interested in: integrity, hypocrisy, teams and how we show up and how we make decisions. This is where we work at Ashridge. It's an absolutely stunning place to be, but I'm only there probably normally about a third, and the rest of the time, as Sarah said, I'm in different parts around the world working with people in situ where they are. This was my old career. So I used to work in the City of London as a financial futures broker. So this is where I got really interested in people working under pressure and how do people show up? How do they want to show up? And then how do they actually show up when the pressure is on? And it was probably one of the sort of best times and worst times of working in an environment with lots of fun and great camaraderie, but also the toxicity that comes with working in a place that's basically very competitive and being only one woman, 500 women and 5,000 men. It's a very different environment, and the rules of today did not apply then. I'm also going to bring some stories to you today around the sailing research that I did when I first moved to Ashridge as a researcher. And this research has really underpinned a lot of my thinking and work that I do with leaders to help think about what happens in a sailing race and how do you draw those conclusions back to the workplace. And finally, I'm a mum. I'm a mum of two girls, 21 and 22, and they're both home from lockdown from university. And, as everybody else, finding a way to readjust to life. Now we're three women living together, having, lived our separate lives. And just as a practical point of note, my house is a Victorian house. I'm sitting in my front room. My front door is there. Literally, I can touch my front room from where I'm sitting. I've asked the girls not to have any delivery of Amazon, but I can't guarantee that we won't have a knock at the door at any point during this webinar. So I just warn you in advance in case that happens. I thought it was probably worth mentioning. So today, what can you expect? We've spent the last couple of months almost, sort of wondering what's going on for everybody else as we're trying to work out how do we operate, how do we work? We're working at home, we're working in lockdown. Some of us are beginning to go back to work. Some of us have been working with children who are being homeschooled, and you can lose contact other than this square with what is going on out there, and to get some triangulation about what's okay in terms of working practice, what's okay of when do I switch off from work, and how I justify my time when there's the borders and the boundaries are much different to how they've been before. And I wanted to give a chance for a conversation for you to have beyond. So you don't have to have all the answers, but to create networks of people that while you don't have all the answers, between you probably have some good answers. And so as a group of people from this association, how do you now think about how do you bring some of what you're learning here back into the world of the work that you're doing with your teams and your colleagues? And a chance for you, I love this metaphor, and I often think of it when people are trying to justify how they take their time out to learn. If you think about two people chopping wood, they're both chopping wood. One of them is chopping wood all day, and the other one is taking breaks and sitting against a tree and having something to eat and whatever. And at the end of the day, the guy that's been chopping wood all day has a smaller pile of wood than the second guy. And he's kind of miffed about that because he's looking across and saying, I've worked all day. I've worked more than enough. Why does he have more wood chopped than I do? So eventually he goes over and he says, I've worked really hard and yet I have a smaller pile of wood. What's going on? And the other guy said, well, he said, you've been taking breaks all day and I haven't. I've worked flat out. He said, well, when I took a break, I sharpened my axe. And I think as a metaphor, it's really useful for us. It's absolutely essential. It's not even useful for us to sharpen our axe, to take a break, to stop, to restock. And the customer service that we want to have that's driving us to work really long hours, for example, how do we take the break to be able to learn, adjust, do something different so that the feedback loop for that customer service is much richer, to be able to sharpen our axe and create better outcomes really in the long run. So chance to sharpen your axe. Okay. So the intention for this session, I want to this is not going to be a qualification level understanding of what is resilience. I want to give you enough for you to pique your interest in what else is out there for you to think about and what choices and decisions are you making at an individual level. I want to acknowledge the challenging times we've all been through and just to share with you a model to help you think about where are you focusing your energy and what's draining your energy. I'm going to use the Clip Around the World Yacht Race findings to give you a metaphor, effectively, to help you frame your environment, to think about what you might do differently as a result of having a different quality conversation, for example. And while you can't prepare for everything, so as a leader in an organization, you can't have all the answers. There are not, there are a million ways you can do anything. But actually preparing yourself and your teams to be able to respond to anything, given the circumstances, is a way to help develop that resilience for you and your teams moving forwards. Okay, so there's a couple of definitions. There's the mechanical resilience, so it literally like the resilience of a material, the physical property of that material that can return to its original shape. There's something about that definition that doesn't necessarily help us in that we want to learn from our experience. We want to be able to bend in our circumstances, but actually learn and grow as a result of some of the things that are sent to try us. So the psychological resilience is really important to pay attention to, because that is the positive capacity for people to cope with stress and adversity. And what's really important to note here, this is not for organizations to make us more resilient so they can put more on us. If anything, people who are psychologically resilient are more able to say, that's enough. I can do this and I can do that, but that's too much to ask. And I think that's really where my passion for this work comes from, is to help people think about what choices are they making and what choices are they not making by sort of shielding themselves from the reality. And here is a model. It's a really old model. I think it's like 1901 or 5 or something. It's based on any biological material that basically, if you stimulate something enough, it will grow. So you can take a box of flowers, if you like, on the windowsill, and there are certain flowers, if you brush the top of the flowers, they are stimulated and they grow. Obviously, if you smack it with a book, they're likely to die. So this model exists for any biological substance, which of course, as humans, counts us. And we need stimulation. We need something. We need something to get us up and get us going and get us out of bed. Otherwise, we just sit around, whilst it might sound quite nice, just sit around watching Netflix all day. But eventually, something has to happen, and we have to have some pressure to move us forwards. And what we're hoping in an organisation and any teams that we work in is to create the right level of push and pressure to peak up the performance. Too much, and it can lead to burnout and severe stress. And at that stretch point is where we step up, we do something different, we take on things that feel out of our reach, and yet we manage and we adapt and we cope. And now we know something about us that we didn't know before, and we're able to take on a little bit more stretch, which does require giving up something else. Now the risk is this area here, this zone of delusion, and this can happen when I believe wholly that if I just keep working really, really, really hard, I can see in the short, once this is over, this will be fine. Once I get past this phase, it will be fine and I can rest then. But that rest time never comes. And it's when does the reality actually mean this is the new, I'm going to use a pannied phrase of the new normal, but when does normal actually just mean we are busy a lot of the time? And when is that busyness our currency and our language rather than actually what's helping us move forwards? So being careful of this zone of delusion where we're actually in burnout or stress, but we're convincing ourselves that it's going to be fine. And that's a really important thing for us to pay attention to. And the conversations I'm having recently is a real issue around that, particularly as I mentioned at the beginning, the boundaries of work being so blurry in lockdown. And some of the resilience, and this is just a drop in the ocean. There is so much research out there, and I can, if you're interested, you can. I mean, it's Googleable. There's nothing here really that I'm sharing with you that's not Googleable, other than my experience and my work that I'm doing. But the actual facts of it remain. There are some fundamental things that we can pay attention to when it comes to resilience in terms of sleep, exercise, and diet. The thing with sleep is both quantity and quality. It affects our executive function. So the part of the brain that makes the decisions, that manages the kind of assessing risk, the social interaction. When we're younger and our careers are a bit more pull a handle, you know, you do this long enough, you get stuff done, that's not particularly complex, you can be tired and you might yawn a lot and you may be bored, but it's not going to necessarily affect your performance. But the further along you go in your career and the more complex it becomes, sleep becomes a really important factor for thinking about how you manage the way you show up in terms of resilience. So sleep, good sleep hygiene, really paying attention to the stories you're telling yourself at night about what time you should go to bed. A colleague of mine, Vicky Colpin, thinks that, you know, by the time you sort of rested into bed and you're ready to sort of go, okay, now I'm going to settle to sleep, 15 minutes is a good ballpark amount. If you're falling asleep much quicker than 15 minutes, the chances are you're tired. If you're taking much longer than 15 minutes, the chances are you're not tired enough. Now, you may be physically tired, but your brain may not be. So what are you doing with your phones? Have you got your phones next to your bed? Are you like me and you convince yourself it's because I need an alarm clock, when actually I could just buy an alarm clock? So sleep, fundamental thing for resilience. Exercise. Not so that you're a weekend warrior, you don't have to run marathons. Enough 30 minutes a week of 30 minutes 3 times a week of getting yourself in a heart rate up, a little bit sweaty. So a good strident walk, a light jog, climbing stairs instead of taking lifts, and it's just enough to keep the body in a virtuous circle of oh, I've forgotten the name of it. The aerobic. It's more aerobic for resilience protection factors. And diet. Thankfully, I have one daughter that's really good at looking after diet and making sure that we're all eating well, because I suspect it would all be brown and crunchy if it was left to me. But so diet, what goes in, it is really going to make a difference. And of course, everything in moderation. You kind of know when you're eating well and when you're not. The psychological stuff is a little more complex, and so there's things around the confidence in your own abilities, and this is not the same as the sort of hubris, you know, I know what I'm doing. This is really kind of having that internal self-efficacy about who you are, what you kind of know you're good at, and what you know you're not good at, as importantly as what you know you are good at. Because if you're continuing to try to do something you fundamentally know you're not good at and you don't enjoy, there's something around that role that you have in that you're going to need to make a change, because that will take away your resilience protection factor. It's going to take away your resilience. Interpersonal confidence, being able to walk into the room enough and be able to have a conversation enough that you are able to say what you think, within reason, to be able to be with others and feel that you are able to hold your own and have conversation. This is not related to introversion and extroversion. And it's not related to shyness and not shy. They're completely separate things. But just having that interpersonal confidence in yourself to be able to hold yourself in a room. So find out how you do more of that. Self-awareness is a critical one, and that's really kind of most of the work that I do, is helping people see themselves, how they really are showing up, and recognizing where you may be saying one thing and doing something else. We'll come to that towards the end about how do you start stretching yourself around some of those things. Optimism, of generally being able to look on the bright side. This is not the same as a toxic positivity where we're just trying to convince ourselves that things are good when they're just not. So there's back to the boundaries of what is just not good. But ultimately having an optimism that if this hasn't worked this time, we can do something different and we can turn it into something else, assuming there's no death and destruction or financial ruin. If there is actually risk, like real risk, tangible risk, then of course, you can't just make something feel like a positive experience if there is real risk. But it's recognizing what really is at risk. And having people in your family and friends network who don't necessarily have to know the ins and outs of your work, but they care about you enough to know how you are experiencing the world at the moment. And having that is a real protection factor. I'm running through this relatively fast on the presumption that you can go back and watch it again, but also there's a lot. I just want to give you lots to kind of provoke you to think about what else can I be doing to make a difference. And then there's some of the stuff around the organizational. How much control do people feel like they have? How much are they told what to do, and how much do they feel they have some influence over things to be able to actually co-create some of the work that they're doing? And of course, I'm talking to you about how much influence do you have, and where is outside of that, where it's just out of your control and out of your influence. And so therefore spending lots of time and energy concerning yourself with something you have no control or influence over. It's back to the, do you do something about it, or do you let it go, or do you still ruminate on it? And it's just recognizing those patterns of thinking. Seeing change as a challenge as an organization, rather than change as a threat, because there is threat in not changing. So how does the organization view change? The personal vision. Often people say, oh, and every organization needs a vision, but the vision must map with what's interesting for the people that are part of it. So just stapling something to their foreheads and saying this is our vision, and then wondering why they complain. How does it map to what you want? And we'll talk about this in a little bit. The flexibility and adaptability, and I've really noticed this with client conversations. So I've been working with an IGO, and traditionally they're quite bureaucratic, really, because they're working frontline and they are working in death and destruction, etc. But what's interesting is being able to recognize in the moment what we thought we needed to do in a pandemic and what we actually need to do in a pandemic are two different things. So being able to work flexibly and adaptably to be able to be more resilient as an organization, to think about how do we do something different and not get caught up in what the mandate said or what we agreed, or the protocols that we want to roll out from 2018 or whatever. Again, the social connectivity, a really important question in the Gallup poll is, I have a best friend at work. And this question is related to all sorts of positive outcomes. And you might think, well, why do I need a friend at work? You might not, but they are linked to positive outcomes in terms of retention, in terms of people taking days off sick, in terms of productivity and customer satisfaction. So do you have a friend at work? Do you have a best friend at work? And then learning from feedback. And the work I do, feedback is obviously one of the cheapest ways of shifting an organization, and yet there's something fundamentally awkward about giving it or asking for it. And people will go a long way not to ask for or give feedback, always saying it's something to do with the other person. But invariably in the work, I recognize, and when I've tested it out, it's how I feel about giving it and it's how I feel about asking for it. So it's recognizing what makes you kind of fear giving feedback and what's true about that. So really kind of testing some assumptions and experimenting with learning from feedback, because it's one of the biggest resilience protection factors about who are we and how we show up, and having some sense of not just obviously the verbal feedback, but the feedback loop of learning about how do we work together. Now, team resilience is different. So team resilience is not just a group of people who are individually resilient. Team resilience is the resilience of the team. And as a leader, you are not responsible for the resilience of each individual team member, but you are responsible for creating the environment for people to be able to flourish for themselves and fundamentally get out of their way in terms of what you're taking away from them as individually resilient people. So the team resilience is like is the group. So let me give you a little bit more that might help. So this is some research done by a colleague of mine called Jill Flint-Taylor, who's done amazing work looking at resilience. And she looked at lots of literature and found there were these common themes for all the team resilience stuff. So while personal resilience of a team member does contribute, it is not singularly enough. So you can have a group of people that are highly resilient as a group of individuals, but they may be particularly self-oriented in their purpose, and they don't map to each other. And so there's something about, you may have 5 really resilient individuals, but that doesn't make a resilient team. And equally, you can have people who may be low in resilience on any one day or period of time, but the team can still be resilient because of the way that they're interacting with each other, because of the other factors. Diversity in the team, and anyone that's ever taken the time to look at diversity properly, it's diversity and inclusion, and the psychological safety required for people to really feel included and not just assimilated, not just I can be part of this team and not noticed for me being different. I can actually bring my difference into this organisation and into this team. I can actually speak of my experience and my lived experience to be able to bring that different perspective and know that I have the psychological safety to speak is a really important part of a team resilience. Team level positivity, again, this is not the toxic positivity where everything's just great and we're just gonna be really, if we just grit our teeth and get through it. This is a genuine positivity of being able to see the good, being able to pull out the, what can we do with this, given this is where we are. So we are where we are, what do we do now? And being able to find a way forwards with positivity rather than the toxic positivity, which I have experienced in the work that I do, of just no one really wants to go there. We don't really want to kind of lift the lid on what's really going on, because we get on, and it can come from a really good place of we just really like each other and we don't want to spoil things, but it means they're not having the important conversations that you need to have to work as a resilient team. So it's just recognizing what's actually going on with positivity and avoidance of negativity. How am I doing? Cool. Then you've got the balanced leadership style, and this is really for leaders to recognize their preferences. So what is it that they want from any experience they have as a leader, and their preference of how they show up and how their experience, and recognizing, is that actually what's necessary for this group now? So typically it's like what's got you here isn't necessarily going to get you there, and it's recognizing the need to be supportive and challenging and getting that balance right of being able to let people go and make their mistakes, but also hold them enough that they don't feel like they're in free fall, and being able to develop a model that's not a learned helplessness, so that people come to you every single time because you're the one with the answers. Actually, how do you develop the resilience in the team for them to be able to operate? And this came out in the sailing research. There was one guy, so two examples of 2 skippers. One was very much, I need to sleep. You know, I need to sleep, and fundamentally, if I don't sleep, I'm useless. So for him, it was, how does he create a crew that are able to operate as if he wasn't there, so that he could literally go and sleep? If we take that metaphorically, I need to go and do strategy stuff, or, you know, I need to go and do some stuff that's not directly related to the team. How do they organize themselves with my support enough for them to deal with their own processes of how they work? The other skipper had the opposite, and he felt he needed to do everything, so he never slept. He literally never slept. And obviously that had its own implications further down the line. The high levels of well-being, you know, the sort of being as a separate thing to this. So really kind of being able to be happy, to be able to see, to feel not the drain. I've got the model coming up in a just a metaphor about the bath. You know, there's one thing putting all good stuff in, but it's actually keeping the plug in so it doesn't drain away through things like controls and processes that just take away energy and you know, lead to feeling drained all the time. How do you get those things higher so we can take that, so people can operate in a way that is conducive? And then kind of building on that, this sources of workplace pressure, like what is it that we're actually doing? Do we need to do as much as we're doing because of what is our preference of how we capture data, for example, how we want to demonstrate our work, how we want to demonstrate our, whatever it might be, our finances or our time or our travel allowance or whatever it is that actually get in the way. Of course, there's due diligence and making sure we keep on top of things, but recognizing how do we get stuff out of individuals in a way as painless as possible. People want to contribute to something and not feel like they, you know, it's going to require a stick to make it happen. It could be things like work pressure, you know. So it's interesting in terms of recently, a friend of mine has moved to London to avoid the commute because the commute was a source of work, was a source of pressure, has moved into central London in a much smaller house, flat, to be closer to where they work. And with all the lockdown and the COVID, the organisation has now decided, well, it seems to work so well, everyone working from home, we're going to shut our office in central London. And so suddenly this workplace pressure has now become a home life pressure because now they're in central London in a small flat. As it turns out, they quite like being in London. But this workplace pressure, for example, like commuting and making people come in or not making, all of that stuff, is it actually useful for what we're trying to do? And how do we manage that? And that's something of the team resilience. So there's the bath analogy, because that tells you everything you need to know about a bath. So let me pause a second and give you a brief story about the sailing race. So that was a little bit of the structure of the theory. So if any of you are particularly interested in it, that's one slice of theory. There are tons. And the University of Heathrow, you'll find even more. But I've just given you enough to kind of get you thinking about, well, what's going on for me? What's going on here? Why does this matter? Who am I in this? How do I recognize myself? Now I'm going to give you a story about this sailing race because, well, what you'll see, it's less of a story of a sport analogy and more of a story of just how humans operate when they come together. And it really does link quite closely to how we operate at work. And just to be clear, I'm not a sailor. And to some degree, I think that helped because I was looking at things with like a novice eye. So some of the things that some of the sailors took for granted, I was able to ask stupid questions and say, well, why is that? And what does that mean? And I've been on a boat twice. So here's one. This is me in the red at the back, just absolutely having the time of my life on a boat going across, you know, the harbour. But ultimately, what we found, so we went across the race, across different times, and we interviewed the crew and the skippers. The crew were amateurs. It could be me or you. We could be lifelong sailors, or we could have 3 weeks worth of sail training. We could be there because we want to learn to sail. We could be there for any reason. The skippers were professional skippers, obviously licensed to sail a certain size boat. And there were, in this iteration, 10 of them. And the crew were divvied up according to gender. I think it was 40-60, 60% men, 40% women. And the crew were divvied up by size of people. So you didn't have like a whole rugby team in one team. Age was distributed. Nationality was distributed. The only thing they had was they had someone that had some kind of engineering, you know, being able to do something with a motor, and someone else who had some kind of doctorate medicine, which included a vet on one race. So that was the only kind of stipulation, as well as the skipper. And then they had 2 watch leaders. And the crews were anywhere between 15 and 20. You could do 6 weeks, or you could do the full thing, which took about 10 months, and they were called the Round the Worlders, and then the short ones were called the Leggers, just to give you a bit of background. And what I want to share it for you, because as a metaphor, I want you to think about the multiple perspectives that people can have when they come to a team, when you're working in this kind of highly complex world, which is just the way of it, and yet still align with each other. We all have our different wants and needs, and yet we can still align. We don't have to all coalesce around one thing. How do we bring together lots of different ways that people want to show up to work, maintain their resilience and their resources of resilience, and still move us forwards in typically commercial organisations or purpose-filled whatever is the organisation that you're part of. Help you focus on what capabilities are required now. So what do we literally need to be doing to help us move forwards as a boat? And reflect on the level of autonomy that is necessary and why. So bringing into question what's our need to kind of hold things tight or let things go, and what's actually necessary for this particular group who are now spread working virtually, perhaps thinking about coming back to work, thinking about reconvening in this new space with social distancing, etc. And I want you to think about this in several ways. Think about your direct teams, think about if you have project teams, think about it if you're part of experiment groups or action learning groups, if you want to think about it in department. The model still stands, whether you're talking about your family that you live with, or you're actually thinking about an organisation. The model still is a fairly universal model that applies to whoever it is that you want to consider as part of your team, if you like. And the biggest finding, and it was totally confusing for us, because we went into this research thinking, well, look, there's a race, we've got a finish line, we've got podiums, we've got first, second and third. What we can do is we'll collect lots of data and we'll be able to tell what makes a winning team, because we'll have the output to compare it against in the traditional positivist research. And very quickly we discovered that winning didn't mean the same thing to everybody, even though it was a race. I just to really reinforce that point. This is when it's absolutely explicit. There is a race. They've signed up to a race. There is a flag of some sort, a cup of some sort, a podium of some sort, where the vision is absolutely explicit, and yet people showed up for different reasons. Now you put that into the context of the world of work. There isn't a clear goal, there isn't a clear thing, and yet we kind of think we can coalesce around one vision that we might offer to a group of people. So it's to really kind of draw out what all the different ways that people saw this race, and yet it was explicitly a race. So for example, first past the post, yes, some people did want to be first past the post, but equally there was also a second reason. I want to be first past the post because I'm naturally competitive, but also if I'm first past the post, I get better sponsorship deals in the future, or I might get paid more as a guest speaker. Someone who comes in fifth won't get paid as much as someone who comes in first as a skipper. So there's always other reasons. The safety, stay out of the bottom half, so just for a moment, it's not I want to win and go forwards, I want to avoid being there. It's a very different motivation, wanting to move forwards or wanting to stay away from that, and just put yourself in this in terms of organisationally. Have fun, be a happy boat. That came with consequences. So one skipper absolutely wanted a happy boat. It was his last campaign. He was going to retire. He said, it's an 18-month contract. I really love this work, but at the end of it, I'm going to be retiring. So I just want to enjoy my last 18 months. Another guy was like, I want a happy boat. I'd love to win. I'd be great to win. I really would enjoy winning, actually. But we've agreed as a boat that we want to be a happy boat. And yeah, that would be great. I mean, to win would be fantastic. And of course, that came out in his behaviour, because he wasn't happy when they didn't perform well, and it didn't feel like a happy boat. And one lady, now notoriously as part of, as I talk about this stuff, is to see dolphins in the Golden Gate Bridge. She's like, I don't really care about the race. I just want to see dolphins in the Golden Gate Bridge. And, to have that and still be part of a winning team, because the team were working together. So when there was wildlife, they made sure she saw it. So when she saw that, she was more likely to contribute to this bigger bigger team. They're not going to go back to see dolphins if they're moving forwards in the race. but they just kept their eye out whilst they were racing to make sure that she got to see the things that she was interested in seeing. And this is that goes across everybody. And to stay on the boat and not fall off, you know, that was winning. There was also charities, raising money for charity, raising awareness of charities. The race was a secondary part, and for many it was way down the list. So how do you bring those people together, particularly when, you know, the human spirit, if you like, is people with their expectations. I love that, you know, with their expectations, like how dare they have expectations when they're coming on a round the world yacht race. The challenge is not so much the sailing, although that is enormous, the challenge, but molding the crew and leading them. It's the human side of it was probably going to be as big a challenge as the sailing side, and it certainly has, without a shadow of a doubt. Sailing is the easy bit, it's the management of people, it's the hard bit. So just to put that into context of how are we showing up and managing in these times when it is so complex, how do we have those conversations that really unearth about dolphins and the Golden Gate Bridge? Is there psychological safety to be able to say, I'm less interested in the winning of the race, I'm happy to contribute to it, but what I'm really interested in is this. Is there scope to have those conversations? And the positive outcomes that we found, so I'll move on to the model in a second, but this is what we ended up measuring as the positive outcomes. So boats where people were visibly taking responsibility, where they were wanting to go the extra mile and put in the awesome effort, people pulling their weight by choice. They wanted to go faster, they wanted to go further, they wanted to be part of this winning team, even if they weren't actually that worried about the specifics of the race. So it's really important to kind of keep that in mind. The negative outcomes were things like teams within teams. So even on a boat, there was competitiveness between the teams, or, you know, people talking about each other, and it didn't divide in any obvious way. So it could be age, it could be nationality, it could be anything, and also friction. So friction is something that slowed people down and got in the way. So, for example, I want to just take a little bit of time thinking about what is slowing us down and what is getting in our way in terms of, if you compare now to last year, this is all brand new for us. Well, it's not now because we've been in lockdown for however many months, but, you know, in terms of having to now operate with a level of friction that we couldn't even have imagined. So a friction is consumes energy, impairs agility, creates distraction, gets in the way of performance. It can literally be an argument with somebody. It could be, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm confused. I think they think I know, but I don't. It could be someone keeps using my stuff and every time I go to get it, it's not there. So it can be very small and very big. And if we just take our current experience of this last, since lockdown, you've got COVID-19 itself. So you've got this literally a disease, a pandemic that is making people very ill and killing people, and family and friends. And I don't say this lightly when I say this. If I'm affecting you by what I'm saying, I do apologize. It is there. Okay, so we've got the actual risk of the disease and how that is being compromised now as people go back to work and go back social distancing. People are frightened to get on trains and things because of the lack of social distancing. You've got the day-to-day, literally, how do I operate, doing the job that I already do more than full time, but now I've got my kids in the other room on an iPad, for example. How do I literally have to spend my days washing my hands, or the impact of what I now need to do differently day to day? But then there's also the concerns for the future. Am I going to have a job? Is our industry going to survive this? What are the protocols of how we're going to operate when we go back? What do we need to think about doing differently? And having to make guesses, good guesses, and sometimes based on industry standards, but other times just going, this has never happened before, but we have to decide something. So these things are really kind of taking up a lot of our time and our energy, completely outside of everything that was really complex before in and of itself. So just wanted to spend a bit of time just giving a frame for you to have a conversation when you start coming back, or just tomorrow, about where are people's focuses? Because ultimately people are also having difficult sleeping, dreams are changing, focus is difficult, lack of motivation, guilt, eating too much, impact on well-being. But then there's also the positives. There's a new kind of connection with people, quiz nights, family Zoom calls, making time for each other, opportunities to do something different, to think about the alternatives and what it opens up in terms of new ways of working. A sense of calm as you're not rushing around everywhere and not sitting at airports at 11 o'clock at night, or wherever it is that your life has taken you before has changed. A chance just to catch up with life, excuse just to sit and watch Netflix, you know, whatever excuse to start. For me, it started running, for example. For other people, my daughter started crocheting. My 22-year-old daughter is learning Moroccan crocheting skills that totally blow my mind, but for something to do. And how compassion is required. So often I've heard people in the work that I've been doing going, oh, well, you know, I shouldn't really complain. I haven't got it as bad as somebody else. You know, it's fine, it's fine. Actually, the positives don't cancel out the negatives. They can still coexist. And someone else's experience doesn't negate yours. Someone else may seem to have it worse, but if you're feeling it today, that's okay. And it's how do you recognize that judgment and justifying that we spend a lot of time doing as we kind of try to operate. Okay, time. And basically, the mud, how deep it is depends on who you ask. I love this picture. I just had to throw it in, and I know Sarah likes dogs too, so I just thought I'd make her smile. But we all go through stuff differently, and it's really important to be kind when we think about ourselves and others as we go through this work together. So back to the race. I'm just going to take you through this relatively briefly in terms of the model. So the alignment is one part. Alignment is who are we and what is it that we want to do. It's very simple level. And the common identity is we have enough between us that I feel like I'm part of something bigger than just me. And this showed up in the research in terms of people wanting to wear the same colours, people wanting to be seen as a group rather than the groups that had low alignment. As soon as they got off the clock, if you like, they took their colours off so that they weren't part of the group. They wanted to be individual. They wanted to go back. And to some degree, that's healthy. But this was quite, you know, divisive in terms of I'm not part of this team. And identity is separate from performance. So the winning team, when you're not winning, people start pointing fingers. So what is it about you that, regardless of performance, who are we and what do we stand for? And then the common intention is this: what is my needs, what are your needs, and what do we need? And this is a cards on the table conversation, which requires some psychological safety. So really be honest about what is it that I really want from this, regardless of what Q2 figures might suggest, or you know, whatever is the big picture of what we're trying to aim for. And that's the cards on the table. So that's alignment is the first part: high, medium, or low. Then you've got the capability. What are the skills and processes that are required for us to kind of lead and learn and live together? It could be literally that, how do we do this stuff? Well, how are we going to communicate? Are we going to use Zoom? Are we going to use Skype? What are the agreed things of how we operate in terms of the processes so I know what to expect? So the technical, how do I literally sail a boat? How do we literally return from lockdown? But then there's also the people stuff. This is around managing expectations, integration, communication. How do we develop the trust and support for each other? What do we need, and how do we have those conversations to be able to ask for what we need? And typically when people have high alignment, they want to find ways to be capable. They want to learn. When alignment is low, they'll do the bare minimum to tick a box. So it's like just watching where alignment and capability are in relation to each other. And then the final part is autonomy. So you've got alignment, who are we and where are we going? Capability, what do we literally need to do and how do we develop the capacity to do it, either technically or interpersonally or personally, values, etc. And autonomy is recognizing, and this is kind of probably the hardest part almost, is how much autonomy do I give? Of course, if alignment is high and capability is high, you can literally stand back and let people get on with it because they are in the same direction. But autonomy without alignment is just people doing stuff, people doing their own thing. It doesn't lead you anywhere. And so high autonomy is when people respond to the why, they're able to deal with high levels of complexity and they're able to make decisions and act within that common intent. When low autonomy is people responding to what? You need to do this and this is how you have to do it. There's a high level of control. So if you've got novice people who don't know what they're doing, their alignment is low, they've just come on board, they don't know how we operate around here, of course you're going to have a higher kind of contact with them. You're going to give them less autonomy. And you're told what to do and how to do it. Now, the risk here is, what's your preference as a leader? This is one of the structural things that you need to be careful of, is because alternatively it's called a very long screwdriver. You might say, oh, I'm stepping back and I'm giving them complete autonomy, but actually my screwdriver is really long and I'm tinkering from afar. So recognizing what is your preference and how much of this is you letting go and delegating and letting them make mistakes. And equally, how much is it is you saying, well, they're a group of adults, they've got to organize themselves, when actually they might need a bit more contact with coaching, for example, or different quality conversation. And so just the chance for you to think now, okay, so where is my alignment on my team? How aligned do I feel like we are in whatever the intention is that you're working with? How capable? What is it that we need? What is it we want? And how much autonomy? So I suspect that most of you have realised people are actually quite good at getting on with stuff. If you just get out of their way, people make stuff work because they want to do a good job. And actually it's just a lot more coaching and team conversations to help people bring together their experience. Okay, so let me just, so what does this mean? So basically, how can you create the time for a start and justify that time to think about this stuff and what it means to you? How might you use these frameworks to have a different conversation with your teams, with yourself, but also with your teams, are using this kind of, where are we and where's our focus? And you don't have to agree, it's just having the conversation is the key. The resilience model, where are we lacking in this stuff? Where can we pay attention and where can we focus our energies in terms of helping us put more into the bath and stop the water flowing away? How can we plug the gaps? And also recognizing the metaphor for the long-handled screwdriver. To where do I need to learn to let go? And where do my team actually need me to be with them because it's what they need rather than what I feel like I want to give? And that's the tricky part. Well, it's all tricky. It's all complicated. It's all very messy, but you'll find your way. And ultimately, I love this picture because it just makes me laugh. My hope is for any leader is that they're able to be their authentic self in and of their day, whether they're at home, whether they're in work. And of course, you've got slightly different ways of operating, but I really want people to have they don't have to hide their authentic self away and have to present this version of themselves and let themselves loose until 4:30. So that's my offer. So are there any questions? I really rattled through that very fast because I wanted to get more in for you to be able to hear it, and knowing there was scope for thoughts and reflections and questions after. In the meantime.
Thank you, Trudi. That was really great. Really enjoyed that. I have a question here for you. In your view, in this normal new, what kind of leadership is now needed?
Ooh, okay. Probably the best metaphor that I've got would be the what would I say? The host. As leader as host. So leader as host is sometimes you're the one outside at the party, you're the one saying, okay, we've got dinner at this time and then we'll, the dancing will start and then we'll finish with, and sometimes you're the one setting the tone, and sometimes you're the one just getting out of everybody's way and letting them enjoy the party and letting them create the entertainment that they need from the party itself. You've created the environment, now you get out of their way and let them get on with the party. Sometimes it requires you to be out the back washing the glasses because we've run out of glasses, and it's okay. You don't have to be the one that says other people clean glasses. Sometimes you need to clean the glasses. You need to be out the back doing the work, and other times it's you are the one. Of course, now's not the time for you to be cleaning the glasses because your need is somewhere. So it's just recognize as a host, what do I need to offer the container, if you like, or the context for people to be able to flourish when I'm as a host. So play with that metaphor, I think, would probably be my advice.
Thank you. A couple more coming in now. How much should leaders show vulnerability or say I don't know?
Okay, that's a really good question. And
sorry, I missed the end of that. Don't know when people are looking for certainty.
Yes, and that I don't have a magic one for that. It's discerning, because some discerning for yourself when that might be, and in in my experience, a well-placed I don't know can bring so much value, so much more value than coming up with an answer. And then other times, coming up with an answer is exactly what's needed. So it's a really difficult one to discern. I guess learn to notice your own desire and what's actually going on for you. Recognize, when is it my assumption that they need an answer because I'm usually the one that rescues, or I'm the one that's meant to provide answers, and how much are you projecting on them thinking that's what they need. Yeah, that comes back to self-awareness. So put yourself in some situations where you don't know how you're going to respond, and it can be outside of work. You know, it's putting yourself, so you really get to an understanding of what some of your values are, and what stories you're telling yourself about your values and how you think people are responding.
Yeah, thank you. This is perhaps more of a statement, but it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on it. Tim has said, I have a concern about the approach of encouraging people to make mistakes and learn. Depending on the context, a mistake can have big consequences. Sailing has dangerous moments, for example, in weather conditions when mooring.
Yes. So, that is often, you know, letting go and letting people make mistakes is probably one of the biggest hurdles I think leaders face. And you know, and I work a lot with humanitarian aid, I work in oil and gas, I work, you know, all sorts of people, and often we say, you know, about being innovative and failing fast and, you know, prototyping and all, but that's all well and good, but, you know, we work with real people and there are lives at stake, or, you know, there's death and destruction, or there's financial ruin. If I work in investment companies, for example, you know, there's huge investment funds at risk if we make mistakes. You know, we can't just be flippant. And it's being really honest with yourself about what is really at risk. So I did some research looking at risk. So we spoke to leaders and asked them, how do you think about and deal with risk? And we went through a broad spectrum of leaders, some in kind of death and destruction, financial ruin, and others, there was an opera lady that was a CEO of an opera house, for example. And actually the hard risk, you know, so formal risk, where there is actual death and destruction and financial ruin is at risk. And also the mitigation required against it is as punishing as the risk itself. So the fines that are attached to not following protocol and doing due diligence, for example, that's a formal risk. But actually most of the risk most people are working in is an informal risk, where there's as much opportunity as there is for failure. And so often I've said to people, you know, we're working with death and destruction. But actually, as an organisation, if you take all of them, 20% of them are working with death and destruction, and about 20% of the time, actually what's at risk is maybe a fear of failure myself, or being able to have to justify myself to them, whoever they are, and or my reputation, or of not being seen to have done a good job. And the chance of that failure is massive compared to the likelihood of it. Sorry, the likelihood of it is tiny, but the impact of it is massive. And so we end up making decisions based on that tiny chance it will happen, but obviously the large scale of it, when the reality is it's not going to happen. And actually, if it, you know, so it's how we end up justifying in that kind of more informal risk. And I'll share with you, Sarah, the risk report afterwards if it's useful, because it really kind of helps people get a grip on what's really at risk and what's the story I'm telling myself about it. Because ultimately, if you're stopping people from making mistakes, they're creating a learned helplessness, because they'll always come to you for the answer. And actually, you might be the risk. You may be a risk factor. Unless you get perspective on what other people can deal with, you won't know that.
Yeah,
you just know
okay.
what you know.
That's great. Thank you. If you do have something you can share, then we can make that available.
Yeah,
That'd be really helpful.
I'll share both reports.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
There's still a number of questions here, so I'll see if I can get through as many as we can. The next question is, how do you start in building alignment with a settled team? And this is from a new leader in the team.
Yeah, it's that cards on the table conversation. So I'll often tell the story of the sailing race, and even though it's really obvious, you know, for a sailing team where winning would be obvious, they all had these different reasons for being there. I mean, really tangible, passionate reasons. Such a small part of it was the race. And being able to have that conversation with a team where there's psychological safety to be able to say, do you know what I really care about? I like that we're doing this, you know, X, whatever it might be. But every day, if I know, so let's take a librarian, for example. You might have 3 librarians. One of them might feel passionate about how we organise the library in terms of geodecimal systems. I think. One of them might be really passionate about helping others access learning. And one of them may be really passionate about how do we influence the bigger university that this library is part of so that we get greater funding. They're 3 librarians. Whatever we have as our view of a librarian, for example, how do you really get to the heart of what someone really cares about and that they're prepared? And it could be, I just don't want to let you down. So a lot of the group work I do with people in experiment groups, for example, so I do a lot of work with public sector. A lot of the time is I just don't want to let the team down. I want to be able to do enough. I feel I care about it. I just don't have the energy to do too much more, but I don't want to let you down. Having that conversation means that you're not then disappearing because you're not trying to all boil the ocean. You're able to say, I can only do this much. I'm still connected to you. I'm still interested in doing it, but I can do this much. And as a group, you kind of go, okay, I get that. Thanks. And in that transparency, you have a more resilient team. It's when you don't have that conversation, you all talk about a big picture thing that you'd all quite like. None of you could quite muster the energy to do it. So nothing happens. Or 2 people end up taking it forward and everybody else kind of disappears. So it's really having that cards on the table, and it's not about getting agreement. That's really important. It's actually being selfish. It's being really selfish and being really clear about what I want, but it does require the psychological safety and the speaking truth to power. So, my door is always open, but that presumes I have a door and you've got to step over the threshold to come and talk to me, which is Megan Rates research. So really creating the psychological safety to have those quality conversations is the start, and then having the quality conversations.
Great. Yeah, I mean, it's always a difficult thing to start, and that leads quite nicely into our next question, which is what skills are needed for laying it out there conversations?
Yeah, and this comes back to that vulnerability and that humility of actually being able to demonstrate that you don't have all the answers, and saying you don't have all the answers, but then with every part of your body kind of thinking, yeah, but I do. Like, I know I do, but I'm going to tell them I don't. That won't wash. So it's really bringing yourself to things, and it might need a bit of a run up to it. So just turning up and saying, tell me your darkest secrets out of the blue, why would I tell you? So there's something about really kind of being able to share with authenticity and integrity something about yourself. The Johari window, so a disclosure of what you don't know about me and what I know about myself, and being able to just be a bit within reason. This is not opening and bearing your soul, but just having within reason a bit of disclosure about who you are and what some of your own kind of fears and concerns are, rather than this everything's fine, everything's good. Feedback, so asking for feedback. And so the biggest advice of asking for feedback, if you get any feedback, just say yes, thank you. Just say thank you, even if it seems small and kind of doesn't really go anywhere. If you, in that first instance that someone offers you feedback for the first time, you say, oh yeah, but the reason I did that was, you will never get any more feedback, and that will travel around the office. So for the first 20 times you get feedback, say thank you, and just, even if you don't agree with it, whatever, you just say thank you. And because you will never get the more constructive stuff that's really going to be helpful, because the higher up you go, the less you are going to get feedback. So the quality of that feedback is really important.
Yeah.
So making sure you create that path. Yeah,
brilliant. Great advice. Thank you. We've got quite a few questions. I'm not sure we're going to get through all of them, but I will promise that we will get answers to you in the post-webinar information. But we've got a couple more things. Some lovely comments. You're really making people think a lot about what you said today, and so I'll pass those comments on to you. One question here is, could you provide some advice on client care within the context of your talk?
Yes. So the model that I've used, I've shared with you today, the alignment, capability, autonomy. I've used it extensively actually with organisations to think more broadly, both about the client, how do we create alignment, capability, autonomy with our client relationships, but also with our contractors. So often so I work with big organisations that somehow have an assumption that we know more, we'll use you as a contractor. But of course, they have a huge amount of knowledge and the client have a huge amount of knowledge. Why would we not create more alignment about what do we want? Of course, if you're getting 200 widgets delivered to them on Tuesday, you just need to deliver the widgets. You know, if that's the relationship that you have, the alignment doesn't have to be high, the capability doesn't have to be high, the autonomy doesn't have to be high, you just have to deliver widgets. But of course, if you're working in each other's name effectively, or you have a relationship across time, why not have a quality conversation around what do we each want, rather than customer, provider, I deliver things to you, because then you've got customer provider tensions. But actually, if we work together as a sort of entrusted partnership with higher alignment, what do you want from this? And what it actually creates, you know, the capability that we need between us, and also managing that risk comes closer to home, as in it's much less risky if you have that kind of relationship. There was one of the risk research guys was telling about, he was working with the NHS and they needed alignment over their software, and he said, oh, does yours, they needed to have the same one to do the project. And one of them, he said to the NHS manager, he said, which one are we going to use? And he said, well, does yours work? And the NHS guy said, well, no, we need to do an evaluation. We'll do an evaluation, we'll measure, you know, we'll see which one's best. And he said, well, does yours work? He said, well, yeah, it does work. He said, well, we'll use yours then. And he said, yeah, but we need to do an evaluation to make sure we don't carry the risk. And he said, look, I'll sign off all risk, we'll use yours, we can get going on Monday. And so just recognizing that where is actually the risk in the relationship between the customer and the provider, or the provider and the contractor, etc. And those quality conversations will actually help you identify what are we really risking, where the opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. So really, really so important, these conversations in all instances, isn't it, really?
Yeah. I think really that's the shortest line between A and B, is a good quality conversation.
Yeah.
That is the shortest line.
We've got, I'm just conscious of time, so I think we've got, there's a couple more questions, but if I just finish off with this one here, and then I'll pass the others over to you to respond to post-webinar. Yeah. As a member of a team or a leader of a team, how should you deal with not being able to cope when pressure is too much? Owning up to it carries its own personal risks, so it's tempting to keep quiet.
Yes, and it depends on, and one of the dangers is the more pressure you're under, the less likely you are to be able to actually discern that risk. So the more pressure you're under, because of the flight or fight response, you're more likely to see danger when there isn't danger, and you're also more likely to overestimate your ability to cope. So it's a double whammy. The threat seems bigger and your ability to cope seems bigger, and both aren't necessarily true. So how do you create the space? And typically having that support network, so it might just be someone in that group to be able to say, I need help. So my colleague Lynn Lilly often talks about the kitchen table confidant. Who is your kitchen table confidant? Who is the person you can go to and say, I don't think I'm coping, or I need help? Because as humans, we do need help. And as leaders, we especially need help, because actually the ambiguity pump is pumping up their questions to them, to their questions to them, and then you're left with all the difficult questions. The easy ones get answered. You're left with the difficult ones. So of course you can't answer them all, because some of them are unanswerable. So you do need help, either to literally answer the questions or just to get the clarity to catch yourself in the anxiety and the spiral of burnout, which, especially when you're overestimating the risk that it seems to be, and overestimating your ability to cope, if that helps.
Yeah, and I've heard Lynn firsthand talking about that before, and I know kitchen table confidant is something that I've always had and sort of really valued in my life as well. So thank you for that. So I think we are coming to the end now. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you so much, Trudi. It's been a real pleasure having you join us today. And just like to say a big thank you. So thank you. Thank you, everyone.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you, everyone. I hope that was helpful. Take care.
Thank you.